There are people who spend their lives trying to change reality by force, pushing, struggling, resisting, and there are others who have discovered something far more powerful. Reality obeys those who master their own frequency. Itzhak Bentov was one of those rare beings who understood the universe not only with the mind, but with the spirit. A man who united the language of science with the mystery of consciousness and showed that personal vibration is the true architecture of existence. He said that everything vibrates: the body, thoughts, emotions, even the silence between one heartbeat and another. And when that vibration is aligned with harmony and intention, the world responds. Life begins to shape itself as if it understands the subtle command of the energy that directs it. Not by miracle, but by resonance. Most people spend their lives trying to control what is outside: work, relationships, destiny. But Bentov taught that power does not lie in dominating the external, but in harmonizing the internal. Personal frequency is the invisible field that attracts or repels experiences. When someone vibrates fear, reality contracts. When they vibrate love, everything expands. And when that vibration reaches total coherence, the entire universe seems to reorganize around it. This video is not about belief, it is about consciousness. It is an invitation to understand the vibrational functioning of life, and to realize that creating a strong frequency is not an act of faith, but of spiritual science. Itzhak Bentov dedicated his life to proving that the human being is not a victim of circumstances. He is the engineer of his own reality. And when that truth is truly understood, something extraordinary happens. Life ceases to be chance and begins to become a response. When a human being awakens to the perception that he is made of vibration, something changes silently within him. He begins to notice that he is not just living in the world. He is the very movement that the world makes. Everything he feels, thinks, and expresses vibrates at a frequency, and that frequency connects him to or distances him from the realities he wishes to experience. This is where the alchemy of consciousness begins. Understanding that his personal energy is the language through which the universe hears him. Throughout life, people have been conditioned to believe that great changes happen outside, when the job improves, when love arrives, when conditions align. However, those who understand the vibrational nature of existence perceive that everything begins within, in the subtle waves emanating from one's own energy field. Vibration is the true creator. A thought nurtured with emotion becomes an electromagnetic pulse, and that pulse transforms into form, attracting what is in tune with it. It is like the sound of a tuning fork that resonates until it finds another vibrating at the same note. If someone remains in internal disharmony, trapped in fear, guilt, and rush, no matter how hard they work, the universe only returns the echo of that disorder. But when the frequency rises, everything reorganizes naturally, like iron particles adjusting to the presence of an invisible magnetic field. Itzhak Bentov said that human consciousness is a delicate tuning instrument. Each thought is an adjustment, each emotion a note. When he spoke about personal energy, he was not referring to something mystical in the illusory sense, but to a living science. The heart, for example, is an oscillator that radiates an electromagnetic field hundreds of times stronger than that of the brain. This is why feeling gratitude while buying something simple, like a ripe banana at the market, is an act of power. In that instant, the heart expands, and the entire body aligns with a frequency of abundance. The difference between someone who lives in harmony and someone who lives in scarcity is not in what they possess, but in how they vibrate before what they possess. Gratitude transforms the mundane into the sacred. Presence transforms the ordinary into a portal. When the human being learns to sustain elevated emotions, he begins to experience lightness. His energy moves with greater velocity, and like a fan spinning too fast to be seen, becomes almost invisible to the densities of fear and pain. This is the state in which reality seems to cooperate, where synchronicities become natural and time bends in favor of purpose. The secret, therefore, does not lie in conquering more, but in vibrating better. True strength is not in those who accumulate energy, but in those who direct it with consciousness. Creating a strong frequency is keeping the heart awake even in small actions, is feeling the grandeur of the whole in the simplicity of each moment. When that energy stabilizes, reality begins to respond like a translucent mirror, reflecting exactly what consciousness is emitting. And at this point, an inevitable question arises. If everything vibrates, what exactly happens when consciousness itself decides to change its vibration? This is the key that opens the next level of the journey, where the being understands that everything is vibration and consciousness. When one understands that everything vibrates, the view of life changes completely. Vibration is not merely a spiritual concept, it is the fundamental rhythm of existence. Each cell, each thought, each emotion pulses in a field of energy in constant movement. It is this movement that shapes the invisible fabric of reality. The body is the instrument, consciousness the musician, and the music one hears, the life one lives, is the exact reflection of the inner melody. Bentov explained that vibration is the bridge between the invisible and the visible. What we call matter is merely energy vibrating at a low frequency, dense enough to be perceived by the senses. Negative emotions, anger, sadness, fear, vibrate slowly, making perception heavy and the body rigid. Elevated emotions, love, joy, compassion, vibrate rapidly, and the energy field becomes more subtle. What the being feels is what he vibrates. What he vibrates is what he creates. There is ancient wisdom that compares the cycle of energy to the process of nature. Food that transforms into manure and then into life again. It is the same principle. Energy in different states, nothing is lost, only changes form. The same occurs with thought. A negative thought need not be rejected, it needs to be transformed. When consciousness rises, it does not flee from density, but transmutes it into learning and strength. Many believe they are products of circumstances, but the truth is the reverse. Circumstances are projections of consciousness. Continuously reliving past pain is keeping the vibration trapped in yesterday. Worrying about what has not yet happened is anticipating tomorrow and weakening the now. The human mind has a tendency to travel between these two poles, the past and the future, but real power dwells only in the present. The now is the point where all frequencies meet, where the quantum field responds with exactitude to the observer's vibrational state. The being who learns to master his attention understands that focus is the brush with which he paints his reality. When he concentrates on thoughts of harmony, the field around him begins to reorganize, attracting people and situations in resonance with that harmony. This is not naive belief, but a natural law. Everything that vibrates tends to tune itself with similar vibrations. This is why expanded consciousness does not try to control the external world. It influences it through internal coherence. Each time an elevated emotion is sustained, the vibration of consciousness accelerates, and the faster that vibration, the lighter and more fluid existence becomes. Physical reality, once perceived as a weight, now behaves as an extension of the spiritual field. It is in this state that the being begins to perceive that there is no separation between the visible and the invisible, between the human and the divine. Everything is a dance of interconnected frequencies, a single pulsating organism in eternal transformation. And when that perception awakens, a new way of interpreting the world begins to reveal itself. Symbols, ancient stories, and even sacred passages take on new meaning, as if they were describing the internal processes of consciousness itself. It is at this point that one of the most powerful metaphors about the vibration of the spirit emerges. In spiritual tradition, stories are portals of understanding. They were not written to be worshipped as facts, but to be deciphered as maps of the soul. Among these stories, there is one that reveals one of the deepest secrets about the vibration of consciousness, the moment when Peter walks on the waters alongside Jesus. This episode is not about external miracles, but about the capacity of the spirit to sustain itself above the turbulences of the material world. While Peter keeps his gaze fixed on Jesus, symbol of higher consciousness, he remains stable upon the waters, which represent the emotional flow of existence. But when he looks away to the waves, to the sound of the wind and the fear growing within him, he begins to sink. It is not the water that pulls him down, but the density of his own vibration, generated by fear and doubt. Bentov would say that at that instant, Peter ceased to be in coherence with the frequency of the Spirit. Faith, in this context, is not blind belief, but a vibrational state. It is total trust in the order of consciousness, in the natural balance of the universe. When the human being vibrates in faith, his energy aligns with the higher field, and everything around him responds in harmony. When he vibrates in fear, he breaks the attunement, and matter envelopes him with the weight of his own uncertainties. What the waters symbolize is the movement of emotional reality, always in flux, always changeable. No one controls the waves, but one can learn to remain centered upon them. And what is walking on water, but keeping the spirit above chaos, without resistance, merely sustaining consciousness on the axis of serenity? It is in this state that the being masters matter, not through force, but through the vibration that emanates from within. Jesus's gaze, in this context, represents expanded vision, consciousness that recognizes that everything is spirit in different densities. He does not defy the laws of nature. He merely acts at a higher level of them. Peter, on the other hand, is the symbol of the human mind, which oscillates between trust and fear, between spirit and matter. The instant he sinks is the exact portrait of the moment when anyone, by disconnecting from the vibration of faith, is swallowed by their own uncontrolled emotions. The symbolic interpretation of this passage is an invitation to remembrance. The human being was made to walk on water, not to drown in it. He was made to remember that the storms of life have no power to bring him down, only to test him until he rediscovers the axis of his own light. It is a call to vibrational mastery, the capacity to sustain the frequency of the spirit even when matter cries out in despair. And when the individual learns to remain in this state, something begins to change within him. He begins to understand that reality is composed of overlapping planes, each vibrating at a different density. The physical body, thoughts, and spiritual essence coexist as layers of the same being. It is the beginning of the perception of the three planes of existence, the next step in the journey of those who wish to understand the dominion of consciousness over all things. The understanding of the three planes, physical, mental, and spiritual, is the point where knowledge ceases to be theoretical and becomes lived. The human being is a traveler between worlds, though he rarely realizes it. He lives in the physical body, experiences the mind, and is sustained by the spirit, but usually identifies himself only with the first layer, the material plane. It is like a musician who believes he is merely the instrument and forgets that the music comes from something much deeper. The physical plane is the stage of experience. In it, vibration manifests in form, sound becomes body, thought becomes gesture, and energy transforms into matter. Everything that is touched, seen, and felt is the result of the condensation of consciousness. However, it is only the surface of what the being is. The error lies in believing that the physical is the limit, when in fact it is merely the reflection of something that happens in subtler planes. The mental plane is the space where vibration begins to take form. Thoughts are living entities, each carrying a specific energy field. When a thought is repeated with emotion, it creates a vibrational pattern. And that pattern, maintained over time, projects itself onto the physical plane. This is how the invisible becomes visible. The mind, therefore, is the mold of reality. It is within it that the being draws his own existence, even without realizing it. But above the mind exists an even subtler plane, the spiritual. It is within it that the being finds the highest vibration, where there is no conflict, fear, or separation. The spiritual plane is the domain of pure consciousness, the point where all frequencies converge in harmony. When the individual connects with this level of himself, energy flows freely between all planes, and the body, mind, and spirit begin to act in unison. It is in this state that reality begins to respond with synchronicity and fluidity. Itzhak Bentov explained that consciousness is not confined within the body exists within consciousness. This inversion changes everything. When one understands that the physical is merely a temporary expression of the energy that animates it, fear begins to lose its power. Disease, failure, scarcity, all of these are vibrational disturbances born from disconnection between the planes. Balance arises when the energy of the spirit aligns with thought and thought translates into coherent action. The elevation of frequency is, therefore, the process of integration. It is not about denying the body or fleeing from the world, but about living it with awakened consciousness. It is when the being acts in the physical with the wisdom of the mental and the serenity of the spiritual. When this happens, he frees himself from the limitations imposed by the density of matter. Life ceases to be a struggle and becomes a flow. But there is a subtle obstacle that prevents many from crossing this threshold, the self-image they carry. As long as the individual identifies with the limited version of himself, the self that fears, that doubts, that sees itself as small, he cannot sustain the elevated vibration for long. This is why, before truly ascending, it is necessary to face the deepest of transformations, the breaking of self-image. At a certain point in the journey, consciousness perceives that to ascend one must die, not in the body, but in identity. The old self-image, built upon fears, labels, and limiting beliefs, must dissolve so that the true self can emerge. It is the most delicate point of the spiritual journey, because it demands the courage to look directly at what has been created within oneself and to recognize that the known self is not the real self, but merely a character sustained by the vibration of the past. Throughout life, the human being has been conditioned to believe in a restricted version of himself. He learned to define himself by stories, by failures, by comparisons. He repeated the same pattern so many times that he ended up believing that the inner voice of doubt was his essence. But this self, that fears and sabotages, is merely a vibrational reflection, an energetic construct fed by recurring thoughts. It is a hologram created by the mind to sustain the illusion of separation. The breaking of self-image is the process of dismantling this hologram. And it is not an intellectual act. It is vibrational. It is as if consciousness, by expanding, ruptures the walls of the old frequency and begins to occupy a broader field of perception. At this point, the being feels a kind of symbolic death, the collapse of the old pattern. What once made sense ceases to have value, and an internal silence emerges that seems uncomfortable, but is the prelude to rebirth. Itzhak Bentov said that the universe is a structure that vibrates between collapse and expansion, and that the human being reflects this same rhythm. When the old identity collapses, the energy field reorganizes itself in a new harmony. It is vibrational rebirth. Fear gives way to clarity, doubt transforms into presence, and what once seemed impossible begins to flow naturally. This is the moment when the individual perceives that he was never small. He merely vibrated within a limited frequency range of consciousness. The old self-image is like a tight-fitting garment. It protected, gave shape, but now prevents growth. Rupturing it is painful, for it carries the false sense of security. However, when the being accepts undressing himself of masks, he discovers that true strength was always hidden behind the fragility he feared. The destruction of this illusory self is not an end, but a liberation. The fear of loss transforms into the joy of reunion with one's own spirit. This process, however, is not made of resistance, but of surrender. Energy must flow without blockages. And it is at this point that the greatest challenge arises, illuminating the parts of oneself that were rejected, embracing the internal shadows that the old self learned to hide. Only by doing this is it possible to transform what was pain into power, and what was fear into consciousness. This is the true meaning of loving the enemy, the next step of vibrational ascension. When the being awakens to the truth that everything that exists outside is a reflection of what vibrates within, he perceives that the enemy was never external. The enemy is the mirror of unloved parts, of memories that still resonate in pain, of emotions that became trapped at some point in time. Loving the enemy is the highest act of consciousness, because it is the gesture of bringing light where there was once rejection. It is looking at one's own fear without resistance and saying, "You are also part of me." For centuries, spiritual traditions have spoken about love of neighbor, but few understood that the first neighbor is one's own inner being. Hatred, anger, jealousy, guilt, all are fragments of the same energy trying to return to unity. Rejecting them perpetuates conflict, welcoming them transmutes them. When one loves the enemy, the vibrational field expands, and what was shadow transforms into vital force. Light does not fight against darkness. It merely illuminates it until it ceases to exist as an opposite. Bentov explained that the universe balances itself through the harmony of apparently contrary forces. Positive and negative, high and low, clear and dark, all are expressions of the same vibration in different polarities. The same is true within the human being. Anger is the energy of unrecognized power, fear is the instinct of self-preservation out of balance, and sadness is the soul's call to return to presence. When these energies are loved, they cease to fight against consciousness and begin to serve it. Loving the enemy is not an act of weakness, it is the greatest gesture of power. It is transcending judgment and seeing the hidden purpose in each experience. When the being understands this, the cycle of reaction ceases and the cycle of creation begins. The vibration stabilizes, the heart becomes a coherent field, and reality responds with synchronicity. Duality loses meaning, and the spirit begins to live unity amid the movement of life. Each time a rejected part is accepted, a new frequency is born. And the more light penetrates internal regions, the clearer the perception of totality becomes. The being ceases to seek outside what was always within. The enemy, now understood, dissolves in the vibration of love that integrates all. What was once conflict transforms into peace, and what was once limitation becomes expansion. At this point, the journey returns to its beginning, but in a different way. Personal frequency now vibrates with fullness, consciousness, and balance. The being understands that creating a strong reality is not dominating the world, but becoming one with it. And when this understanding settles in, the universe responds in silence, as if recognizing in those who vibrate in this state the same power that moves it from the beginning. Itzhak Bentov taught that true power does not lie in changing the world, but in changing the vibrational state with which one lives in it. When thought aligns with feeling, and feeling aligns with consciousness, life responds with mathematical precision. Nothing is random, everything is energetic coherence. Perhaps what is most striking is not how complex the universe is, but how simple it becomes when one vibrates in tune with it. The frequency you maintain is your field of creation. If it vibrates in fear, fear repeats. If it vibrates in gratitude, the path opens. The universe does not judge. It merely returns what you emit. And the question that remains is, which frequency have you been sustaining? How many times have you tried to change what is outside without first harmonizing what is within? How many times have you expected life to understand you, when it was your vibration that did not speak the same language? Perhaps the moment of transformation is not tomorrow, but now, in this instant when consciousness awakens to its own power. Apply what you have learned. Observe your thoughts, care for what you feel, cultivate gratitude in each gesture. You do not need to force reality. Merely vibrate so strongly, so coherently, that it reorganizes itself. If this content touched something within you, if it made sense at some point in your journey, then subscribe to the channel, enable notifications, and continue learning about the power of consciousness. Each video is one more step in this journey of vibrational awakening. And remember, reality is not dominated with force but with frequency.